So in this video, we will be looking at the transition that occurred around 10,000 years ago between the Paleolithic era and the Neolithic era. And I'm going to enlarge this so I can write in these little rectangles, and you should be taking notes as well. I'll try to keep the notes part of this brief. And the important thing here is not that you necessarily remember every detail, but that you understand the transition that took place between these two time periods, the big concepts. So we'll start with simply what do these words mean? Paleo is Latin for old, lithic for stone. So this is basically old stone age, and this is simply a reference to the types of tools that they used, which were made out of stone. And it's important to remember that the Paleolithic people were nomadic, so they did not have houses, they didn't have complex societies. These people were on the go, and so they lived in the mouths of caves, they lived in huts and tents, pretty much made out of animal skins. And like I've already said, their lifestyle was nomadic because they did not have agriculture. Their food source was animals, and so they traveled around in search of animals. And wherever they went, they hunted the animals there, and a lot of times they hunted them to the point of extinction, so they had to keep on moving. Typically, they lived in groups of 50, sometimes 20 to 30 people, but up to 50. These were tribal. This was a tribal society, and not only did they hunt, but they were gatherers as well. So they were hunter-gatherers, we'll put that. And what were they gathering? They were gathering leaves, they were gathering berries, anything like that that could be eaten to supplement their heavy protein diet of meat. So I've already said the tools they used were pretty much chipped stone. Sometimes they had wooden weapons, but most often they had stone tools. So what type of clothing did these people have? You probably could have guessed this, but their clothing was made from animal skins. This is a society very much dominated by stone tools and animals. So nothing is wasted here. Whenever Paleolithic people killed an animal, they would make use of all of it for tools, or for weapons, or for cups, or use the skins for clothing. They really, again, didn't waste any part of the animal that they had killed. So looking at the politics and government of a Paleolithic society, again, there are probably 20 to 30 people living in a clan, maybe 50. They're moving around from place to place because they're nomadic. It really does not necessitate a large government structure. So Paleolithic society was dominated by elders, and this was based on age. The eldest male in the society would typically be the elder. He would be the one to make a decision if a decision needed to be made. And another reason why there was no great need for a strong government was because of the fact that they did not have private property. There was no concept of private property. So most of the time, if fighting broke out, it was because of private property. He stole what was mine, or he let his animals graze on my land, which that wasn't really happening in the Paleolithic society so much as it did the Neolithic society, because they were not domesticating animals yet. So what kind of achievements did they have? Cave paintings. They figured out fire, which was pretty remarkable. They would even sculpt things, And most of their sculptures were also like mammoth ivory or reindeer horns. They would use stones to sculpt little figurines. For the most part, there aren't giant sculptures because this is a society on the move. And with a nomadic society, you don't want to have to carry large stone busts or large sculptures every time you move from place to place looking for animals to hunt. So there was a little bit of sculpting, but mostly small figurines and not large sculptures. There were cave paintings. You could even throw the rough stone tools in the achievements category. That's pretty impressive and resourceful in itself. And so what type of food did they eat? Again, hunters and gatherers. So for the most part, meat, nuts, and berries. And again, the women would be responsible for collecting the nuts and the berries, and the men would be responsible for hunting the animals to provide the meat. So we will take a look now at the Neolithic age, starting with the meaning of its name. Neolithic, this is Latin for, neo is Latin for new, and lithic again for stone. So this is the New Stone Age. And the time period that we're looking at here is about 10,000 years ago. So this is like 8,000 BC that this transition begins to take place. And probably the most important thing to keep in mind here is that you go from hunting and gathering to agriculture. And agriculture brings about all kinds of changes. With a sedentary lifestyle, people are no longer moving around from place to place. They grow larger. They need governments. So this is going to be the big change that takes place. The New Stone Age is about agriculture. So the type of dwelling they had, mud bricks that were supported by timber. So the use of bricks and timber to create a more stable home. Remember, the Paleolithic people were nomadic. They didn't need long-term homes, so they pretty much lived in tents, something that could be constructed and torn down quickly. With the Neolithic people, you would begin to see more permanent housing. The lifestyle, again, these people were sedentary, meaning they stayed in one place for a long time. They farmed in these permanent settlements. They raised and herded animals. With the discovery of agriculture, this became their new food source, and families evolved. They got larger. It was easier to grow a family. There was more fat in this diet with agriculture as opposed to the protein and nuts and berries of the Paleolithic. So women settled down, they gained weight. Their hips became larger. It allowed for them to carry babies to full term, and families grew. So what kind of tools did they have? Well, we know from the name New Stone Age that these people were still using stone tools. They did adapt them for agriculture, but again, still using stone to make tools. One difference here is that they grinded the tools down in order to sharpen them. And so these were sharper stone tools as opposed to the dull tools used by the Paleolithic people. In regards to clothing, the Neolithic people still used animal skin, but with agriculture and the development of thread, they were also able to create woven garments. So if you were extra fancy, then you would not only have animal skins, but also woven clothes. So moving on down, and in this category we are looking at politics and government. This is more complex because the society of the Neolithic peoples is more complex. And so typically the military leaders and the religious leaders were the ones who had authority. The military leaders, religious leaders. Over time, they eventually even evolved with the concept of monarchy, having a king, one point person to make decisions, and hierarchy. And part of this was because the concept of private property emerged. These are, again, sedentary people. They have built houses, they have land that they're growing food on. And so there's the need for this private property to be protected, not only land, but also tools and other things on this private property. So the need for government evolved along with the growth in the society. So, what were the achievements of the Neolithic people? I would say first and foremost, they discovered agriculture. And I don't know how much credit they can really take for this. It was kind of discovered by accident. Whenever they threw seeds out and they came back the following year, they would note, hey, the plants have grown up in the area where we threw our seeds out last year. And so over time, they figured out that if you put seeds in the ground and they are properly watered and the weather is good, then they will spring up into new plants. And so this created a new food source for them. So the discovery of agriculture, albeit by accident, the plow, which was used for agriculture, obviously. They still had paintings. Typically, the paintings were no longer on caves, though. They were on walls. And also pottery. One issue that the Neolithic people had was that they grew too much. And so what would you do with the surplus? It needed to be stored. And so the people created pots in order to store up the excess seed or grain or food, whatever it is they're storing, for the next season. And so that brings us to our last category, which is food. And you can probably figure this out. By this point, they're still eating meat, but they have also learned to grow crops. So mostly corn, they would eat wheat, beans. These are higher calorie foods that made these people even healthier. And again, the added calories allowed for women to bear more children and to extend the age that a woman could bear a child, so that they were having children longer as well. And just sort of a side note here, one thing that agriculture created was the specialization of labor. With the Paleolithic era, basically men and women are pretty much equal. Even though the women are gathering nuts and berries and the men are hunting, their roles in society are both very important and needed. But with agriculture, you need some people to store the crops, you need some people to grow the crops, you need some people to maybe build fences, some people to carry things from here to there. And so the specialization of labor is developed where not everyone is doing the same role. You have different roles that are being fulfilled by the people. So that is sort of a key concept, something that developed with the Neolithic people that was not there previously. Also, I don't have religion as a category here, but both the Paleolithic people and Neolithic people were spiritual. It wasn't really an institutionalized thing, and it wasn't really well developed. Paleolithic people believed in animism, or basically that spirits controlled their environment and the animals around them. Pretty much the idea that everything has a spirit. The tree has a spirit, the animal has a spirit, people have a spirit. And in order to connect with those spirits, they would smoke mind-altering substances, most of them grown in the ground, but that was their way of connecting with nature. And especially with the Paleolithic people, small stone statues of pregnant women suggest that their worship was of a feminine deity, or at least the concept of fertility and nature. Also, the fact that they buried their dead tells us that they were spiritual beings. They believed that the bodies needed to be taken care of in case they were needed in the afterlife. They weren't just discarded completely. And so this will conclude our discussion of the Paleolithic and Neolithic eras.